So let's try and make sense of this. This is the third time the United States is vetoing a resolution at the UN Security Council in support of Israel and thereby rejecting a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities. Let me go across to CNN's chief international correspondent, Nic Robertson. He's joining us live from Tel Aviv. What explains the US and it consistently vetoing resolutions that have been brought forth at the UN Security Council, which have called for a cessation of hostilities? It's the third time it's doing so. Seemingly, I mean, it's the only country that vetoed this resolution yesterday. 13 countries voted in favor and Britain abstained. What explains this?
Yeah, the US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Greenfield, explained it this way. She said that the current resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire was, on the one hand, potentially going to upset and derail very delicate negotiations that are going on with Hamas that will lead to the release of hostages, or are intended to lead to the release of the hostages. She also said that in its current form, just putting forward an immediate ceasefire wouldn't put Israel and the Palestinians on a path to a sustainable peace. By this, she means that immediately having a ceasefire without addressing the hostage issue would leave a massive piece of unfinished business. So it's the US contention that what they're putting forward, which is a pause, a temporary pause in the hostilities at a time that is right, that appears to mean in the fairly near future, but they didn't put a timeline on it, but also includes the release of hostages, fits that US narrative that the best way to address this problem, to get the hostages released, which is what Ambassador Greenfield said everyone at the UN Security Council agrees on and is part of the US resolution, but not the one that was proposed by Algeria, gets to the bigger issue. So I think those are the two central reasons that the United States went the path they went along.
I'll come to the proposed US resolution in just 1 second, but I do want you to shed light to our viewers on where are the negotiations that were being mediated by Egypt and Qatar for a ceasefire deal that would potentially involve release of the remaining hostages. Where are those negotiations stuck at?
They're ongoing. They are going slowly. One of the US mediators, or certainly senior White House official, is going to be in the region, expected to be in Cairo, possibly Wednesday, possibly in Israel Thursday. That would be in the context of these negotiations. Egypt, one of the key interlocutors. You had the head of the CIA, Bill Burns, in the region last week. He was meeting with the Mossad chief, with the head of intelligence in Egypt, with the Qatari prime minister, to try to wrangle a way forward. But to your point, where is the impasse at the moment? It principally seems to be around Israel's insistence that hostages should be released, and that they are only offering a temporary pause in hostilities to achieve that. And Hamas is sticking to a position that says there should be a complete ceasefire, that the Israeli forces should pull back initially out of the urban areas inside of Gaza, and then after another 6 weeks or so, pull out of Gaza completely, that all military offensive activities should be halted permanently. That is Hamas's position. Now, the position on the table, as best we understand, is calling for that 6-week pause, but then built into that would be the possibility of getting to a permanent ceasefire. But at the moment, the Israelis are taking a very, very tough position, putting a lot of pressure on Hamas, insisting that Hamas comes to their terms, threatening in a couple of weeks, if Hamas doesn't hand over the hostages, to continue with a military offensive into Rafah, the southernmost part of Gaza, where close to 1.5 million Gazans are living right now, more than 1 million of them displaced from other areas inside of Gaza. The United States has said that to do that without providing a safe place to the civilians is not something that the United States can support. But that's where Israel is at the moment. It's trying to put maximum pressure on Hamas.
I do want to talk to you about the US-sponsored, US-drafted resolution, which you referred to in your earlier answer, which also calls for a ceasefire. But I believe, from whatever reporters have seen about the draft of that resolution, it says a ceasefire at a practicable time possible. When does the US plan to bring that to the UN Security Council?
Again, I think we get the best understanding, as best we can at the moment, from what the US Ambassador to the UN said, Linda Greenfield said. She said that the language that would go in the US resolution is something that's to be discussed over the coming days. As best we can understand, this is something that doesn't have a fixed timeline to it, but seems to indicate that it's a process that can happen over the next couple of weeks. Of course, from an Israeli government perspective, that means there is less pressure on them to stop their military activities inside of Gaza, and that is the position that the United States has taken since October the 7th. However, the US pressure and language is, publicly at least, is growing greater on the Israeli government, but it still stops way short of joining the majority of international opinion, which is that there should be an immediate ceasefire. Again, the US position is to do that right now could upset the hostage negotiations and won't get to that path for a durable peace, which the United States says, and Ambassador Greenfield said, most of the countries within the, that round the table at the UN Security Council in the chamber there, all agree that this path to durable peace is what everyone wants, and that is a path that has two independent states, an independent Palestine and an independent Israel. And this is, if you will, and we can term it this way in diplomatic terms, the carrot that the United States is holding out that can be achieved.
And one final word to the point that you were making just now. Could you elaborate, what is the pressure, what is the kind of pressure that the Biden administration is facing, both domestically and from the international community? Because right now the impression seems to be that they're almost giving Israel a free pass.
President Biden is in an election year. He's going to have a tough fight on his hands. In fact, the poll numbers are against him in this coming election where President Trump is expected to be the Republican candidate. So President Biden needs every domestic vote that he can get. And there's a proportion of the electorate, young progressives, I believe is the term people use. But this is a significant enough element of Democratic voters who would vote for the Democratic Party, voters who would potentially vote for President Biden, who simply don't like the United States way that it's handling the situation in Gaza and is not putting more pressure on Israel. And for that reason, they may not come out and vote. So Biden needs those votes. So he's under that domestic pressure at home to toughen his stance with Israel. Internationally, there's a huge amount at stake. His regional partners, the United States regional partners, whether they're in the Gulf here or in Europe or in other parts of the world, are becoming more deeply estranged from the US position. And that's going to make diplomacy, it's going to make strengthening alliances around the world tougher. There is a large portion of the world that looks at what's happening in Gaza, isn't happy, looks to the United States to put more pressure on Israel, and that will be to the diplomatic detriment of the United States going forward. So I think those are the pressures at stake here.
All right, Nic Robertson, CNN Chief International Correspondent, live for us from Tel Aviv tonight. Thank you very much.